Election night. East Coast returns are in, and the map looks red enough that reporters start typing with confidence. In hotel suites and smoky newsrooms, the story seems obvious. The incumbent is finished. A former governor turned Supreme Court justice appears poised to take the White House. Some papers even print it flatly the next morning. He's won. And then the West keeps counting. The race had never been ordinary. Europe was at war, and Americans were split between staying out and preparing hard. The sitting president campaigned with speeches saying he'd keep us out of war, a promise that soothed a nation exhausted by headlines from the trenches. His challenger, respected, cool, judicious, said the country needed sterner readiness. Voters did what voters often do in times like these. They agonized. By the time most states closed, the popular vote difference would be just a whisker over 3 points, and the winner's path in the Electoral College would depend on a handful of states where margins could fit inside a single theater. One of those places was small and obstinate. In New Hampshire, the final spread was 56 votes. 56! In a state awarding 4 electors. As clerks tallied late into the night, you could almost picture precinct captains counting by finger and lamplight, one ballot nudging, then another tugging back. The state tipped to the incumbent by 0.06%, and those 4 votes would matter more than anyone wanted to admit before dawn. But the hinge wasn't in New England. It was 3,000 miles away, where the nation's most populous new prize still had ballots to sort. California, with its 13 electors, was painfully close. Early returns favored the challenger. Party men whispered about cabinet lists. A legend, often repeated, never fully proved, says a reporter phoned the challenger suites the next morning and was told the president is asleep. What is certain is the counting finished and California landed on the other side. The final margin there was just 3,773 votes out of nearly 1 million cast, 0.38%. That sliver delivered the election. When the dust settled, the Electoral College stood at 277 to 254. Here's the twist of fate. Flip only California, and history flips with it. Give those 13 electors to the challenger, and the tally becomes 267 to 264, the difference between an almost and a presidency. In a contest where newspapers had literally printed the wrong victor, a few thousand ballots along the Pacific decided who would take the oath in March. The stakes of that hinge were enormous. Within months of inauguration, unrestricted submarine warfare and a notorious telegram would push America into the very conflict so many hoped to avoid. The man who had campaigned on staying out of war would ask Congress for a declaration of it. The judge who might have stood in his place would never get the chance to show how he'd have met that moment. So who were our almost and our is? The incumbent was a college president turned governor of New Jersey turned 28th president, Woodrow Wilson. The challenger was Charles Evans Hughes, former New York governor, then an associate justice of the Supreme Court, a man so widely respected that decades later he would return to the court as Chief Justice. On the morning after the vote in 1916, some Americans woke up believing Hughes had won. By nightfall, the country knew otherwise, thanks to New Hampshire by 56 and California by 3,773. The final map said Wilson, not Hughes, and the world took the path it did. A headline years later would become the most famous symbol of assuming too soon. Dewey defeats Truman. But long before that embarrassment, the lesson was already there. Count every vote. Because sometimes history doesn't swing on speeches or slogans. Sometimes it turns on a few thousand marks in a single state, a handful of electors, and a quietly revised tally that makes all the difference. That November it sure did. This has been Twist of Fate Radio. I'm Angela Clark. Until next time, remember, sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest consequences. Want to explore more stories like this? Visit twistoffateradio.com. There you can read more details about this story and others like it. Plus, you can submit your own Twist of Fate story to be considered for a future episode. You never know what twist of fate is coming next.